The boardroom sat high above the city inside a glass tower that touched the clouds, and early morning light poured through the wide windows as the most powerful people in the company took their seats one by one. Men and women in dark suits placing phones face down, opening laptops and whispering about profits, mergers, and control, because today's meeting was meant to be important. The kind that decided the future of the company. And when the billionaire CEO finally entered, the room straightened as if pulled by strings, his shoes clicking on the polished floor, his posture proud, his face relaxed with the confidence of a man who believed the world answered to him. And he took his seat at the head of the table without looking at anyone, already sure of his power, already certain that nothing could surprise him anymore. When suddenly the heavy boardroom doors opened again with a soft but clear sound that did not belong to an assistant or a secretary, and heads turned in mild annoyance at first, then confusion, because standing in the doorway was a young black boy, no older than 12, alone, no adult behind him, no fear on his face, dressed neatly in a simple suit that looked slightly too serious for his age, his shoes clean, his hair tidy, his eyes steady as he scanned the room full of powerful adults who now stared back at him in disbelief. And for a moment the room fell into an awkward pause before quiet whispers began to spread like ripples on water. Some executives leaned toward each other, some covering their mouths as they smiled, others lifting their brows in curiosity, because no one understood how a child had entered such a protected space. And the CEO slowly leaned back in his chair, his lips curling into a small smile that carried both amusement and pride, as if this unexpected moment was nothing more than entertainment before real business began. And in a calm but mocking voice, he asked the boy if he was lost, calling him kid as if speaking to a stray visitor, and a few people chuckled softly, already expecting security to appear. But the boy did not flinch, did not step back, did not even blink. Instead, he walked forward with slow, confident steps, each one echoing lightly in the silent room, until he stood near the long table, close enough that everyone could see his face clearly. And when he finally spoke, his voice was calm and steady, not loud, not shaky, and he said that he was not lost, that he was exactly where he needed to be. And then he said the words that no one expected to hear from a child's mouth, telling the CEO that he was his boss, and for a split second the room froze as if time itself had paused. Then laughter exploded across the table, loud and sharp. Some executives leaning back in their chairs, others shaking their heads, a few wiping tears from their eyes, because the idea felt too ridiculous to take seriously. A child claiming power over a billionaire. And the CEO laughed the loudest, clapping once as if impressed by a joke, his confidence growing instead of shrinking. And he looked around the room, enjoying the moment, enjoying how easy it was to feel superior. But when he looked back at the boy, expecting fear or embarrassment, he saw neither, because the boy did not smile, did not laugh along, did not react at all to the mocking sounds around him, and instead he calmly reached into his bag and pulled out a thick folder, worn but neat, and placed it gently on the table, the sound of paper touching glass cutting through the laughter like a blade. And though the laughter continued for a few seconds longer, it slowly began to fade as people noticed something strange about the boy's behavior, the way his hands did not shake, the way his eyes moved across the room as if he was studying reactions rather than waiting for approval. And one by one the laughs turned into awkward coughs and uneasy silence, because there was something uncomfortable about mocking someone who looked so sure of himself. And the CEO felt it too, though he tried to hide it, his smile stiffening slightly as he glanced at the folder, then back at the boy, wondering why a child would walk into a boardroom filled with power if he did not believe he belonged there. And the room grew quieter with each passing second. the air thick with questions no one dared to ask yet, because the boy stood there unmoving, patient, as if he knew that the noise would die on its own. And that silence was the moment when people truly listened. And though no one understood it yet, something had already changed in that room, because the laughter that once felt safe now felt foolish, and the confidence that once filled the space now felt fragile, and the boy waited, calm and unafraid, knowing that this was only the beginning of a truth that would soon shake every person sitting at that table. The room stayed quiet after the laughter faded, and the silence felt heavier than the noise that came before it, because no one was sure what was supposed to happen next. And the billionaire CEO cleared his throat, leaning forward as if to take control again, telling himself that this was still his room, his company, his moment. And he forced a small smile before speaking in a louder voice, asking security why a child was allowed inside. But before anyone could answer, the boy spoke again, not raising his voice, not sounding angry, only calm, saying that security would not remove him today. And that made several executives shift in their seats, because the way he said it did not sound like a guess. It sounded like a fact, and the CEO laughed again, shorter this time, sharper, and waved a hand as if brushing away dust, telling the boy that confidence was nice, but pretending was dangerous. And he warned him that powerful places were not playgrounds, causing a few nervous laughs to return. But they were weaker now, forced, as if people were laughing because they felt they were supposed to, not because they truly found it funny. And the boy listened without interrupting, his face calm, his eyes focused on the CEO. And when the CEO finished speaking, expecting the child to shrink or apologize, the boy instead asked a simple question, asking if the board had reviewed the ownership update that morning. And the room shifted again, because ownership updates were not small things. They were serious, protected, and carefully handled. And one board member near the end of the table paused mid-sip of coffee, slowly setting the cup down, while another glanced at her laptop screen as if something suddenly made sense. And the CEO frowned, asking what the boy meant, his voice firm but his eyes now alert, because he did not like surprises, especially ones he did not control. And the boy nodded once and said that changes had happened overnight, changes that were planned many years ago. And he added that the truth was already in the room, sitting quietly inside files and emails that no one had fully read yet. And at that moment, one of the older board members cleared his throat, his hands shaking slightly as he scrolled through documents on his tablet. And he said that there had indeed been an automated alert earlier that morning, something about a trust activation, but it was assumed to be a routine system update. And the CEO turned sharply toward him, asking why this was the first time he was hearing about it. And the man swallowed and said that the trust was sealed under strict legal rules, triggered by age and date, not permission. And now more laptops opened around the table, fingers tapping faster, eyes widening, whispers returning but no longer amused, now tense and uncertain. And the boy stepped closer to the table again, not invading space, just enough to remind them he was still there. And he placed his hands lightly on the folder he had brought, saying that everything they were looking for was already printed inside, signed and verified long ago. And he did not need them to believe him yet, he only needed them to read. And the CEO's jaw tightened as he stared at the folder, feeling something unfamiliar crawl up his spine. Not fear exactly, but doubt, and he tried to regain control by standing up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor, telling the room that this was enough, that the meeting would continue as planned, and that legal teams would handle any misunderstandings later. But before he could sit back down, the board's legal advisor spoke, her voice calm but firm, saying that if a majority stake had changed hands, the meeting itself could already be invalid, And that stopped everything. Because rules mattered more than ego in that room. And the CEO slowly lowered himself back into his chair. His face tight, his eyes locked on the folder as if it were an enemy. And the boy finally opened it, not dramatically, not fast. Just turning the cover and sliding a few pages forward so the closest board members could see. And on those pages were names, dates, seals, and numbers that made silence spread again. Deeper this time, because numbers did not lie. And the boy explained softly that his father had been a quiet man. Someone who believed true power did not need attention. Someone who invested early and trusted time more than people. And when his father passed away, the trust was created to protect the future. Not just for the boy, but for the company itself. And the CEO felt his chest tighten as pieces of old memories surfaced. Brief meetings, quiet signatures, a man who never spoke much but always seemed to know more than he said. And suddenly the past felt closer than it should have. And one by one board members began to understand that this was not a game. Not a joke, not a child playing pretend, but a moment that had been building for years. Waiting patiently, and the boy watched them all. Not with anger, not with pride, but with focus. Because he knew this part was important. The moment when doubt turned into realization. And as the room filled with clicking keys and silent reading, the CEO felt something slip from his grasp. Something he had always believed was untouchable. And though no final words had been spoken yet, though no official confirmation had been announced, the balance in the room had already begun to change. And everyone could feel it, like a quiet wave moving beneath the surface, pulling power away from where it had always been and toward a place no one had expected. And the boy stood still, letting the truth do what truth always did best. Speak for itself. The room remained tense as the board members continued to read and whisper. But the story slowly shifted away from the cold glass walls of the boardroom and moved back in time, to a much smaller place where the boy's journey truly began. Because long before he stood in front of powerful people, he lived in a modest apartment with peeling paint and thin walls, where city noise never slept and money was always counted carefully. And his mother worked long hours, leaving early in the morning and returning late at night. Her face tired, but her voice always gentle when she spoke to him, reminding him that dignity mattered more than wealth and silence could be stronger than noise. And the boy grew up learning patience instead of complaints, watching his mother stretch every dollar and still smile. And though she never spoke badly about his father, she spoke about him very little, only saying that he was a thoughtful man who believed in planning for the future and protecting what mattered most. And when the boy asked questions, she would simply say that one day everything would make sense. And for a long time, the boy accepted that answer, because he trusted her, and as he grew older, strange moments began to happen. Quiet visits from serious-looking men who spoke politely and left envelopes behind. Books arriving in the mail about business and leadership, written in simple language, but filled with deep ideas. And private lessons arranged after school, where the boy learned about numbers, ownership, and responsibility. And though he did not fully understand why he was learning these things while other children played games, he never complained, because something inside him told him that his life was being shaped carefully, like a path being built stone by stone. And his mother watched him closely, guiding him without pressure, reminding him that knowledge was not meant to show off, but to protect others. And when the boy turned 11, she finally told him the truth, sitting with him at the small kitchen table late at night, explaining that his father had been a silent investor in a powerful company, a man who trusted systems more than people and believed that real control should never depend on loud voices. And she told him that everything his father built was placed in a trust, protected by law, waiting for the day the boy was old enough to understand its weight. And though the news shocked him, it did not change him, because he had already learned discipline and humility long before he learned about power. And when the day finally came that the trust activated, there were no celebrations, no cameras, no speeches, only quiet confirmations and legal steps taken behind the scenes. And the boy listened carefully to the advisors who explained that ownership was not about sitting on top, but about standing firm when tested. And now, back in the boardroom, those lessons echoed in his mind as he watched adults struggle with disbelief. And the billionaire CEO remained seated, his fingers tapping against the table as if trying to push away uncomfortable thoughts. Because he remembered the boy's father now, remembered dismissing him as quiet and unimportant, someone easy to overlook, and that memory burned sharper than anger, because it meant he had underestimated the wrong person all along. And as the board members continued reviewing the documents, one of them finally spoke up, confirming that the trust had indeed activated legally and completely, and that control had shifted without warning because that was exactly how it was designed. And the CEO's face tightened as he heard those words, his pride clashing with reality. And he looked at the boy again, seeing not a child this time, but a reflection of the man he once ignored. And the boy felt the weight of the moment but did not rush it, because he understood that power revealed too quickly often broke itself. And instead he remained silent, letting the truth settle slowly into the room like dust after a storm. And some board members avoided eye contact with the CEO now, while others watched the boy with a mix of respect and curiosity, wondering what kind of leader he might become. And the silence stretched on until the CEO finally spoke again, his voice lower, less sharp, asking what the boy wanted. And the boy met his gaze calmly, remembering his mother's words about dignity. And he answered that he wanted fairness, honesty, and a company that did not forget the people who kept it alive. And those simple words landed heavier than any threat, because they carried purpose instead of ego. And the CEO leaned back slowly, realizing that the game he thought he was playing had changed without his permission. And the boardroom no longer felt like his kingdom, but like a place where history was being corrected quietly. And the boy stood there, not proud, not afraid, simply ready, knowing that this was not the end of his story, but the moment when everything truly began. The tension in the boardroom did not disappear after the truth was spoken. Instead, it grew heavier, pressing down on everyone like thick air before a storm. Because now the power in the room was unclear, and uncertainty frightened people more than anger ever could. And the billionaire CEO sat quietly for a moment, his face hard, his mind racing as he searched for a way to regain control, while the board members sat frozen between loyalty and law, knowing that whatever happened next would change the company forever. And the boy felt every eye on him but remained calm, remembering that silence often spoke louder than force. And the CEO finally leaned forward again, folding his hands together, asking the boy how much he truly understood about what he was claiming, his tone sharp but careful, as if he was testing the ground beneath his feet. And the boy answered honestly, saying that he understood more than people expected and less than people feared, and that he did not come to take revenge or make demands, only to protect what was already his responsibility. And that answer unsettled the room, because it did not sound like something a child would say. And one board member shifted nervously, asking if the boy had advisors guiding him. And the boy nodded, saying that wise people always seek guidance, but decisions must still come from the heart. And as the discussion continued, cracks began to show in the CEO's authority. Small at first, like pauses before speaking, glances toward the legal advisor, moments where his voice softened without him noticing. And the board members sensed it too, because power was changing shape right in front of them. And the legal advisor spoke again, confirming that until further notice, Major decisions would require approval from the trust holder. And that statement landed like a quiet explosion, because it meant the CEO was no longer the final voice. And the boy did not celebrate this moment, did not smile or react, because he knew that leadership began not with victory, but with responsibility. And he remembered his mother's words about protecting people, not controlling them. And as the meeting continued, the CEO tried to argue that experience mattered more than ownership, that a child could not understand the pressure of running a company with thousands of employees. And the boy listened carefully, acknowledging that experience mattered deeply, but reminding the room that experience without accountability could destroy more than it built. And that made several board members nod slowly, because they had seen decisions made for profit instead of people. And the CEO felt the room slipping further from his grip, his confidence now fighting against reason, and he raised his voice slightly, asking if the boy planned to remove him, and the room held its breath, because that question carried fear beneath it. And the boy answered calmly that removal was not his goal. Improvement was, and that those willing to change had nothing to fear. And those words settled deep, because they were not threats. They were warnings wrapped in fairness, and the board members began to see a different kind of strength in the boy, one that did not need shouting or pride. And the CEO leaned back again, staring at the ceiling for a brief second, realizing that the ground beneath him was no longer solid, and memories of past decisions surfaced. Times when he had ignored concerns, dismissed voices, and pushed people aside for speed and control. And now those choices returned quietly, demanding to be faced. And the boy watched him not with joy but with understanding, because he knew that fear often hid behind arrogance. And as the meeting moved forward, the board began discussing immediate steps, audits, reviews, and communication plans. And the CEO found himself listening instead of leading, something he had not done in years. And the boy spoke only when needed, choosing words carefully, reminding everyone that the company's strength came from trust, not fear. And as the hours passed, the room slowly transformed, the tension shifting into something else, something uncertain but honest. And by the end of the meeting, no final decisions were announced. But one thing was clear: the old order had cracked, and the future would not be decided by one voice alone anymore. As people gathered their papers and stood to leave, many glanced at the boy with new respect, some with curiosity, some with hope. And the CEO remained seated for a moment longer, watching the child who had walked in quietly and turned his world upside down. And for the first time in a long time, he felt something he could not buy or command: the need to change. And the boy walked out of the boardroom calmly, knowing that the hardest part was not claiming power, but choosing how to use it wisely. The days following the meeting felt slow and heavy, as if the entire company was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Because news of change spreads quickly, even when people try to hide it. And whispers move through offices, hallways, and private calls, though no official statement had been made yet. And inside a quiet legal office across the city, the truth continued to unfold piece by piece, where documents were reviewed again and again, numbers checked, signatures confirmed, and every detail tested under careful eyes. And with each passing hour, the reality became clearer. The trust was real, the ownership was valid, and the young boy was now the largest shareholder in the company. Not by luck, not by trick, but by a plan set in motion many years ago. And the board's legal team confirmed it fully, leaving no room for doubt. And when the confirmation reached the board members, a new kind of silence followed, not the awkward kind, but the serious kind that comes when people accept something they cannot change. And the billionaire CEO received the final report late one evening, sitting alone in his office, the city lights glowing behind him as he read through the pages slowly. his face stiff, his confidence shaken in ways he had never felt before. Because this was not a rival he could outspend or outmaneuver. This was the result of patience, planning, and time. And for the first time, he understood that power did not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it waited quietly until the right moment. And as he read the boy's name printed clearly on the pages, his mind returned to the past again, remembering the silent investor he once dismissed. The man who never demanded attention, but always delivered results. And now that man's legacy stood firmly in front of him, wearing a child's face but carrying an adult's weight. And while the CEO struggled privately, the boy spent those days quietly with his mother, attending school like normal, finishing homework, and listening more than speaking, because his life had changed legally but not emotionally. And his mother reminded him daily that power did not make someone important. Character did, and they talked about what came next. Not in terms of control or money, but responsibility and fairness. And the boy listened carefully, knowing that the next meeting would decide more than titles. It would decide direction, and when the board called for a follow-up meeting, the atmosphere was very different from before. Because there was no laughter this time, no mocking smiles, only serious faces and careful words. And when the boy entered the room again, this time with his legal guardian and advisors nearby, no one questioned his presence, and some even stood politely as he took his seat. And the CEO watched quietly, noticing how the room reacted differently now, how respect had replaced doubt. And as the meeting began, the board chair officially announced the confirmation of the trust and ownership transfer, speaking clearly so there could be no misunderstanding. And the words felt final, like a door closing on the past. And the boy did not react outwardly, but inside he felt the weight of reality settle fully on his shoulders. And the CEO was asked to speak next, and when he did, his voice was controlled, but quieter than before, acknowledging the legal outcome and stating his willingness to work within the new structure. And those words surprised some people, because pride often fought change. But this time reality had won, and the boy listened closely, understanding that this was not a moment for victory, but for direction. And when it was his turn to speak, he stood slowly, his hands relaxed, his voice calm. And he thanked the board for respecting the process. Then spoke about his father, not in detail, but with respect, explaining that the trust was not created to punish anyone, but to protect the company from becoming something it was never meant to be. And his simple words carried honesty. Because he did not speak like a ruler, he spoke like a caretaker. And the board members listened carefully, some nodding, others thoughtful, and he then spoke about the workers, the people behind the scenes whose lives depended on the company's choices. And he said that success meant nothing if it came at the cost of dignity. And that statement changed the mood again, because it reminded everyone why the company existed in the first place. And the CEO felt something shift inside him, something uncomfortable but necessary. Because for years success had been measured only in numbers. And now those numbers were being asked to answer to people. And the meeting continued with discussions about audits, leadership reviews, and future planning. And the boy did not dominate the conversation. Instead, he listened, asked questions, and made it clear that experience still mattered. But accountability mattered more, and by the end of the meeting, a temporary leadership structure was agreed upon, one that balanced stability with oversight. And when the meeting ended, there was no applause, no dramatic moment, just a quiet understanding that things were changing slowly but surely. And as the board members left, several approached the boy respectfully, offering support and guidance, and he accepted politely, knowing that trust was built step by step. And the CEO remained behind once again, watching the room empty. And when he finally stood to leave, he paused at the door, looking back at the table where he once believed power belonged only to him. And now he understood that power was not something you owned forever. It was something you were trusted with, and he walked out carrying that truth. While the boy walked out with his mother waiting, her eyes proud but calm, and as they stepped into the daylight, the boy knew that the hardest part was still ahead, not proving who he was, but proving that he could lead without becoming what he replaced. The next meeting was the one everyone feared and waited for, because this time it was not about discovery or confirmation, but about consequence. And the boardroom felt different the moment people entered, quieter, heavier, as if the walls themselves understood that this was the day when silence would speak louder than words. And the executives took their seats slowly, no jokes, no side talks. Each person aware that every decision made today would be remembered for years. And when the boy arrived, walking beside his mother and advisors, the room stood again without being told, not out of habit but out of respect. And he nodded politely before taking his seat, his face calm, though his heart carried weight, because he knew this meeting would test not his authority but his character. And the billionaire CEO entered last, his steps slower than before, his posture still proud but no longer sharp. And when he sat down, he did not take the head seat, choosing instead a place slightly to the side. And that small act alone sent a quiet signal through the room, and when the meeting began, the board chair spoke clearly, outlining the agenda, leadership review, ethical concerns, and future direction. And as each point was mentioned, the room grew more focused, because this was no longer about a child surprising adults. It was about a company facing itself, and the CEO was invited to speak first. And when he did, his voice was steady but honest, admitting that mistakes had been made, that pressure and ambition had blinded him at times, and that he accepted responsibility for the culture that had grown under his leadership. And those words shocked many, because they had never heard him admit fault before. And the boy listened carefully, watching not just what was said, but how it was said. And when the CEO finished, the room remained silent, not because people did not know what to say, but because they were processing something rare, accountability from a man once untouchable. And then the board chair turned to the boy, asking if he wished to respond, and the boy stood slowly, his chair making a soft sound against the floor that echoed through the room. And he looked around at the faces watching him, some nervous, some hopeful, some still unsure, and he spoke calmly, saying that leadership was not about removing people to feel powerful, but about deciding who was willing to grow. And he said that anyone ready to change had a place in the future, but anyone who refused accountability could not stay, no matter how important they once seemed. And those words were simple, but they carried finality, and the room seemed to hold its breath, because everyone understood that this was the line being drawn. And the boy then spoke about silence, about how true power did not need shouting, and how the loudest moment in the room was not laughter or anger, but the silence that came when truth arrived. And as he said this, many people remembered the first meeting, the mocking laughter, and how quickly it had died. And the CEO lowered his gaze slightly, understanding that the silence the boy spoke of was now sitting between them. And the board began voting on key decisions, one by one: leadership oversight, internal reviews, and long-delayed policy changes. And with each vote, the future took clearer shape. And the boy did not interfere, did not pressure, because he trusted the process his father had believed in. And when the final vote was cast, the board announced that the CEO would remain temporarily, but under strict review, with shared authority and clear limits. And the CEO accepted without protest, because he knew this was not a punishment but a chance. And when the announcement ended, no one clapped, no one spoke, because the moment did not need noise, and the boy sat down slowly, feeling the room settle into a deep, respectful silence, the kind that came not from fear but from understanding. And people looked at him differently now, not as a symbol, not as a surprise, but as a leader who chose restraint over revenge. And as the meeting closed, the board chair thanked everyone and declared the session ended. And people stood quietly, gathering their things, some pausing to nod at the boy, others offering quiet words of support. And the CEO approached him last, standing still for a moment before speaking. And when he did, his voice was low, sincere, saying that he had underestimated silence and patience, and that he would not make that mistake again. And the boy looked up at him and nodded, saying that learning was the only real power that lasted. And the CEO stepped back, accepting that truth. And as the boy walked out of the boardroom, the doors closing softly behind him, the silence remained inside. Not empty, not awkward, but full of lessons, full of change, full of a future that had finally begun to listen. The weeks that followed did not bring loud celebrations or dramatic headlines, because real change rarely arrived with noise, and instead moved quietly through hallways, offices, and meetings, reshaping habits and expectations one decision at a time. And the company began to feel different. Not suddenly perfect, but more aware, as if it had woken up from a long sleep. And the boy returned to his daily life between meetings, still attending school, still doing homework at the kitchen table, still listening to his mother's gentle reminders that humility mattered more than position. And she watched him closely, proud but careful, making sure the weight he carried did not steal his childhood. And inside the company, reviews uncovered mistakes that had been ignored for years, not out of cruelty, but convenience. And instead of hiding them, the board addressed them openly. And workers noticed the change, feeling heard for the first time. And while many people wondered what kind of leader the boy would become, he never rushed to answer that question, because he believed leadership was proven through time, not speeches. And the billionaire CEO worked under oversight with focus and restraint, no longer acting alone. And though the change was difficult, it forced him to listen. And in that listening, he began to understand what he had lost and what he could still rebuild. And the boy watched this transformation without pride or anger, understanding that growth was not linear and trust was fragile. And one evening, after a long day of discussions, the boy and his mother walked past the company building as the sun set, the glass reflecting orange and gold, and she asked him if he felt different now. And he thought carefully before answering, saying that he felt the same inside, just more responsible, and she smiled softly, knowing that was the best answer he could give. And back inside the company, a small ceremony was held weeks later, not for praise, but for acknowledgement, where the board officially recognized the trust holder and outlined the future structure. And when the boy stood briefly to speak, he did not talk about power or victory, but about purpose, reminding everyone that the company existed because people trusted it. And that trust was something earned daily. And the room listened, not because they were required to, but because they wanted to. And the CEO stood afterward, echoing those words, admitting that silence had taught him more than applause ever did. And the meeting ended with quiet understanding rather than cheers. And over time, the company's story spread beyond its walls, not as gossip, but as an example, a reminder that strength could be calm and leadership could be gentle. And the boy continued growing, learning, and making mistakes like any child, but always returning to the lessons that guided him: patience, fairness, and listening. And years later, when people spoke about the day the boardroom fell silent, they did not remember the laughter or the shock as much as they remembered what followed: the quiet shift toward accountability and respect. And the boy, now older, would sometimes think back to that first meeting, to the folder placed on the table, to the laughter that faded, and he understood that the silence that followed was not empty. It was full of truth, and it had changed everything. Not because someone demanded it, but because someone chose to stand calmly and let the truth speak. And that choice shaped a future built not on fear, but on understanding. And in that future, power was no longer something to mock or fear, but something to carry carefully, with respect for everyone it touched.